of Loyola College, Madras. Dr. Kurien was also a visiting scholar at University Africaine de Technology, Benin, West Africa, and the Xavier Institute of Management, popularly known as XLRI, India. He was awarded the US Fulbright Fellowship in 2009 and 10. Dr. Kurien led a study team to Bangladesh to evaluate the working of microfinance institutions. His research interests are in microfinance, international trade, banking, and he has also published a number of research papers in the area of economics. So I welcome Dr. Kurien and hand over this session to him. And we are equally honored to have Mrs. Kurien with us. He has accompanied Sir during this session.
Good afternoon, and my privilege to be here. I've been visiting this center for the last number of times, probably this is my fourth time. Each time I come, I see that new faces of both. The hospitality given is incomparable to what I've faced in our country. So I'm glad to be here, and what I'm going to talk about is. Oh. Yeah. Before it comes to the screen, it's all about, I'm going to talk about US dollar, whether it continues to be the leading currency in the coming years. So what's the status of the US dollar? I suppose that would be title. So why I chose this particular topic is everybody who is following the monetary economics or following money always ask a question: how long will US dollar dominate? It's a good question. And why not China coming up as the RMB? So thinking about that, I thought I would look at the role of USD, US dollar, in comparison to the other currencies. So anyway, let me, now that it's going to come up, let me give you a scenario of what I'll be looking at. There are three pertinent questions which I'm raising in this presentation. Number one, I'll spell it out. Why the dollar remains dominant? Why the dollar remains dominant? Number two, why fluctuations in the dollar has strong global effect. Fluctuation in the dollar, which is exactly what's happening, right? As soon as the dollar strengthens, other countries weaken. So why this phenomenon continues to happen? Whichever direction the dollar shifts, appreciation or depreciation, that affects the global currency scenarios. Why the dollar has risen so much recently, which is in reference to the increasing interest rates, which is making the US dollar stronger, with other countries which become weaker. So looking at these three questions, I wish to address my presentation. So starting with money as such, what are the characteristics which we look at for a money, any currency, to be a dominant, acceptable dominant currency? Number one, which we always talk about, is there has to be some trust and faith on the issuer of the currency, which is of course the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. So that's the one. So from economic perspective, the currency has to be trusted, which is the issuer of the currency. liquidity, it should have liquidity, and the third one is stability. So looking at these three characteristics, we can premise the position of a dollar right on top. The stability is there for the currency, the stability of the country also is well known. Liquidity is very high, the markets are very strong, and finally, the trust on the issuer, the Federal Reserve Bank, is also very solid. So, Lucknow, I think I have a, because I can have this, I can use it on my. Yeah, I think you should do it. So, I think,
Yeah.
okay, you're fine. Okay. I can put it on the slides. Okay, so that's what I have titled it as the future of US dollar as a reserve currency. What next? So, giving you a little introduction of the characteristics of money, and that holds for dollar too. And unless and until those characteristics are not shown or be abiding by on the currency, we cannot consider that as an international currency, or international reserve currency. So a little bit of, I put it in form of a chart that you can look at and understand. So that's a historical one. Now US dollar has been dominating, I would say, since the beginning of the 20th century, when the British pound started losing its status, and after the First World War, the US dollar started rising up, and more so after the Second World War. And the currency took a big rise, particularly as we have seen in the 1940s. The 1940s, where it became the international reserve currency, because Europe was also devastated, and the US economy was revived through the lending from the Federal Reserve banks using dollar. So that's a little historical perspective, and I will be also, I've shown you some idea of the changing the stability or the changing rise in the US dollar with other countries. So going from here, you would understand that the US dollar became dominant mostly because it was the only acceptable currency, and also being backed up by the what we can call the IMF, the World Bank, and this the Bretton Woods agreement gave US a status. And if I'm asked why, because US probably contributed the greatest amount of its reserve or its currency to the international reserve, to the international. So this is just a few statements that have been made, very interesting statement. The statement that you see here is by John Connolly, and he says, well, the dollar is our currency, that is the United States currency, but it is your problem. Now that sounds very good now, right? We create the currency, we give you the liquidity, we provide everything, but if a problem arises, that's not our problem, it is your problem, you have to take into consideration, resolve it. there has been a decline in dollar share in the international reserve currency since the dawn of 21st century. There has been a decline. I have some data on that, which is not on a slide, but I'll mention that. So the decline in US dollar has been accompanied by the increase in euro, pound sterling, and yen. And the latest currency that is in the STR basket, of course, is the RMB or RMB in the basket of STR currencies. The shift in dollar has been in two directions. 1/4 in RMB and the remaining currencies of emerging market economies. So if the dollar has declined, the share of what has gone towards one part of it has gone towards the RMB and the emerging market. So RMB did get a bit of a boost when the decline of dollar started in the 70s. If you go back to the 70s, it was President Richard Nixon who abrogated the relationship between gold and US dollar. Gold was the currencies were assigned to in terms of the gold bar and of course backed by the US dollar. So once Nixon abrogated this relationship, then the dollar lost its value in the sense that it was not considered the only international reserve currency. What came later on after 1970, where the relationship between gold and US dollar or the exchange rate was determined between US dollar and the local currency was in terms of the gold. And the gold could be fully converted into US dollar. So that was 1970 that you see here. US dollar share in global trading, invoicing, bond issuance, cross-border borrowing, and lending outstripped the share of US global trade. US has been a dominant international reserve currency by default. And the default is primarily, when I said after the Second World War, the Marshall Plan, which helped the European economies to get back, was supported by the United States by lending the US dollar. Let me give you a perspective of what the condition is now. So this is what I mentioned, the prerequisite. I gave you three: liquidity, the stability, and trust. So functions of money, which I think is very familiar: minimum exchange, store of value, and the unit of account. Now, if you look at an international reserve currency, if it has to be accepted as an international reserve currency, it should fulfill all these: unit of account, exchange, as you see there, I put it, and store of value. Now, considering these characteristics, if you take renminbi, number one, medium of exchange, I would say yes, it has that characteristic. Store of value, to some extent, it has. Unit of account, not as much in comparison to US dollar. The second reasoning is in terms of its convertibility. Now, in renminbi, is still not convertible on the capital account. It's used in the trade account, but not for capital account. So convertibility of capital on the capital account is not yet being accepted, but on the trade side it is accepted. So fulfilling the characteristics, as you say, all the three characteristics, besides liquidity and stability, you see the role of money, medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account. And those details also be taken into consideration when we talk about the role of dollars international reserve currency. Cross-border transactions. Now, this is again an important role that the United States dollar plays. So, for cross-border transactions, I'll give you some figures which will be worthwhile understanding as we move on. So I don't have the slide for that, but I do have some data on this. So I'm just putting the data to you for your understanding and consideration. So this is a data on showing about the share of US dollar in various forms of assets that are required in the international market. The dollar and the US capital market are far more globally important than the US economy. So the dollar is not just important for the United States, it is important for many global activities that take place. Now let's start with the foreign exchange transaction. Global foreign exchange transaction, the share of USD is over 85%. Share of USD is over 85%. Foreign exchange reserves, USD is about 60%. 60%. I don't have the slide there. This is a picture. Cross-border, that's what I was talking about, cross-border transactions. Cross-border loans is about 50%. Global. Invoicing, unit of account, invoicing, the unit of account, it's about 49 to 50%. International debt securities, investments in securities, it's over 45%. SWIFT payment, the messaging institution, is about 40%. That's for the latest data that I have. US share of world GDP as market exchange rate, at market exchange rate, is about 25%. US share of world trade is only about close to 15%. So what it is implicating that even though the US share of global trade is about 15 to 16%, and the US share of GDP in comparison to the global economy is only 22%, but the use of US dollar has much wider scope and implications. And that shows that the US dollar continues to be a dominating force, a dominating currency, despite the fact it has dropped its global share. Compared to this, if you are looking at China, for example, the China total use of Chinese RMB in the world market as reserve is hardly 3%. So comparing 3% to about 60%, that's a wide margin. So as you look at some of the remaining things that I put across there, the fact that the currency is fully convertible, that's number 4, that it serves as a global unit of account, which means invoicing of all global commodities, commercial commodities, are largely invoiced in the US dollar, which still dominates that. It extends credit or as savings. Investors prefer to move their money if it's allowed in countries of capital movement, or if there's no control on capital input, in money coming and money going out. Today also, in reflection to what you see here, is whenever there's a risk in international markets, as you see that as the United States did raise interest rate and has still been raising the interest rate, investors move their money to the US dollar. So therefore avoiding the risk and also assuring that there is stability in the American capital markets. So that's what we are talking about in number 6. That the investors prefer to keep their currency in a safe, keep their investment assets in a safe market. And in this case, what you're seeing here is that in today's context, currencies are moving away. This affects the local currencies, as you have seen here as example in India. That today I saw it's $1, it's about 80-81, right? So when you go back to the statement of Connolly, dollar is our, but the problem is yours. We own the dollar, but if the problem comes, you got to handle it yourself. Now, the size, volume of transactions, that's the data I just gave you. It's still dominating. There's a lot of margins between a US dollar and renminbi. Following the US dollar, of course, you have the euro that's being used international as a reserve currency. You have the Swedish krona that's being used. You have, all these currencies we are talking about are also fully convertible and accepted by the world markets to be used. The financial system is strong, highly liquid, and I said that in the beginning, the liquidity is required. For any dominant currency, international market, liquidity is required. Because without risk, liquidity, there could be more risk, and to avoid the risk, only way investors think is put in a safe asset in in dollar as an asset. Now, the last what we see is networking, the networking effect, right? Because of the wide usage of US dollar world over for all forms of activities, be it exchange, be it invoicing, being sort of valued, the networking effect has been so strong over a period of time with the use of United States dollar. So I just have this graph there to show you dominant currencies. There are many national currencies, but few are widely used globally. So even though they are their dominant currencies, there are few which are used globally. So as you see here, you put it as global foreign exchange turnover, which I give details. Cross-border bank claims, which is almost, as I said, the invoicing and the cross-border transactions using US dollar, approximately estimated to be about $5 to $6 trillion every day. $5 to $6 trillion of cross-border transactions going on. So invoicing, that's the third part of it. The global commodities today, or major global commodities today, are largely invoiced in US dollar. So when there is this issue of conversion, the problem comes in that if your currency, if a currency is not acceptable or convertible, it has to buy the dollar or exchange for dollar and make the payment. So there's a cost incurred in that way. Transactions cost, the risk cost, all that comes in. So added to exchange rate, which also has its deviations when there's either fall in the US dollar or rise in the US dollar. Normally US dollar is stable, but in the conditions which we see today, there's a bit of instability in the market. And so that affects the international reserve as also the exchange rate. So you can see here too, the dominance of US dollar. So the dollar share as global payment. And I gave you the figures, you can see the data. Global shares about 40% as you see in 2022. So there has been a rise. There has been a rise from 2012 to 2022. The second one, dollar share in global foreign exchange reserves. Now there, as you see, the second one, then you see a decline there coming in. So now what is, as I mentioned, what's happening, there has been a decline in the share of US dollar, which has been compensated partly by RMB and Euro, and some of the convertible European currencies have also taken over. Dollar share in international debt markets, that has risen from 2007 to 2020, is gone in, which again shows that investors prefer to invest in securities, a bond market, preferably which are measured in, or units of measure would be the US dollar. Share international loans, also you see gradually it has gone up from 2020, but other currencies are also being used. Euro is being used also as one of the international reserve currency, and primarily between US, Euro, Australian dollars is also there, British pound, and RMB. This has what has happened. So RMB is still way behind in terms of its contribution to the share in the international reserve market. So here's the data which I was talking about. The dark is United States, US dollar. That's Euro, and that's the share of RMB, and then you can see yen. So you can see in comparison, these are all part, it is all part of the SDR currencies now, all part of the SDR currency. Yes, you want?
Sir, how are you distinguishing between international debt and international loans?
No, the loans which are borrowed from international banks and markets. I'm looking from that, right? So when the loans are given, they are given in unit in currency in US dollar, right? So that's what I'm referring to. So the debt market eventually, when US dollar rises or declines, has an effect on the local currency, which has to be converted from the US dollar to the local currency, or vice versa. That's what I'm referring to. So be it investment, which is what I'm showing here. When investment comes, preferable in securities and bonds, which unit of accounting is in US dollar. Debt market comes in where there's fluctuation in the US dollar. If that stability is not, it affects the exchange rates of the currency, because the currency has to be exchanged from the local currency to the country that you are on, you're required to pay the market. That's how I'm looking at it, the two aspects. Okay. So loans, this is again coming in terms of international development banks, IMF, IBRD, even for that matter, the OECD countries also provide loans, and that also is mostly in the US dollar, denominated in US dollar. But I'm just looking at, you can look at the share of yen. There's comparison here with yen and US dollar. If you look at this way, the US dollar is still dominant, although the share has been declining. The gap between the share of US dollar vis-a-vis at least the Chinese RMB is phenomenally large. Okay, so debt markets, international debt markets, international loans, and of course you see foreign exchange reserve. So foreign exchange reserve, of course, today China, if you look at RMB, what they are doing is they are having this currency swap. Central banks do currency swap vis-a-vis two countries. So their trading or payments are mostly in bilateral trading, is mostly in the two currencies of the countries with which there's trade, whether exports and import. So there's not necessarily a need to convert your local currency in the USD and then make the payments. That's not a need now, wherever there's currency swap. That's basically what you see. So, having started at a very strong position, as I said, historically after the First World War, there was a little bit of decline during the Great Recession. Following the Second World War, the Marshall Plan had come up. US was dominating and providing loans, and that was in US dollar. International agencies, IMF, World Bank, and even today, as you see, development banks are largely lending in US dollars. Considering that there are other convertible currencies, then largely the share of US dollar continues to dominate in the markets. So, as I mentioned that the share of reserve held in USD by central bank dropped almost 10%. So it used to be 85%, and I said it's only about 60 or 62% now, considering the share of USD in international reserve or central banks reserve in many countries. The decline reflects active portfolio diversification by global central banks. So there's been a diversification. We invest in US instruments and invest in other countries, including the RMB. The share of non-traditional reserves, currency other than US dollar, rose by 10%. So there has been a decline in the share of USD, and non-traditional or non-USD reserves have increased or have risen to over 10%. So that's the shift we are seeing. That's the shift. but the shift is minimal and the gap is much still large. Currencies like Australian, Canadian dollar, Chinese renminbi, Singapore dollar, these are the non-traditional. I mean, that's a classification. Traditional in United States, non-traditional is other currencies, other convertible currencies. This is the currency composition. It still maintains a 60% or 59%, as you see here, USD currency composition. Euro is number 2, 21%. Other currencies, 10%, 6% yen, and of course, this is the British pound, which is about 5%. And US dollar, the RMB is close to about 3% or 3.5%, which is still marginally very low compared to the 59 to 60% in terms of the USD. And that's the IMF data that that's what you're seeing here. The fall, which is US dollar coming to about 60%, and the rate, as you see this way, US dollar, that's the euro, which has climbed to about 20%, yen, pound sterling, and others. The others also include partly the RMB, which is about 3%. So this is now yuan now, which is RMB, yuan. Russia has nearly a third of all reserves in Chinese renminbi, right? So that's pretty obvious. Now that they have understanding between Russia and China, there has been currency swap between these two countries. Trading now, since there has been a lot of sanction, I would say, put it that way, on the Russian ruble, there's now a lot of bilateral trades going on in local currency, which is the swap that I was mentioning, the swap between two currencies. So that's what you're looking at. And you have all these countries which are involved in it. As you see, Russia, Brazil, Switzerland, Mexico, and all the countries. So Russians 105, which is again a measure which you see here, which is in billions of US dollars. Russia's stock reserves of US dollar also have declined, partially because there's sanction on the country, and then of course they have been selling US dollar as much as they can to buy other currencies, and that's what they have been doing. Wherever there's a currency swap between two countries, well, then they agree on local payments, like India and Russia or other countries that are buying. As far as their income from the Western world, which is largely Germany, France, and those countries which are buying energy resources, of course, they still have an arrangement between the two countries to pay some certain amount which they have committed to in the local currencies that they have. So that's been a shift there too. This is the non-US dollars. Non-traditional is other currencies besides US dollar. Liquidity market is in those currencies that's growing up. Central bank reserve managers have become more active. Sharp ratio, if you may be understanding that return adjusted to volatility, this all goes on. Yields on bond issue have become more attractive. So what it goes to say that the non-traditional or non-US dollar currencies are gradually intruding in the international market and growing in their share and size in the international market. So that's the question that comes. How long will it take that it would replace US dollar as the dominant reserve currency? These are alternate to dollars, which are not, the term they are using here is non-traditional, which is not a US dollar. Those are the alternate pound, euro, yen, and RMB. So in that sequence, you can see RMB is probably the last of the non-traditional borrowers. I think it was in 2016 or so, where RMB was put into the basket of SDR as a measure, SDR. which is again, it's a unique thing from what I understand it. In the SDR basket, RMB is the one and only currency which is today not convertible. Not convertible. There are capital controls in China, capital control. So none of those requirements or characteristics which I started off with are absent in RMB to begin with at this stage. So that comparison doesn't even come, provided as long as these characteristics are not seen in the RMB. The rest of the other currencies are all convertible currencies, but the share compared to US dollars still continues to be much. So even if you combine pound sterling, euro, yen, and RMB, it still falls short of the size compared to the USD in the reserve markets. That's what I pointed out as SDR, which is also called the synthetic basket in the IMF. UK market size is relatively strong, so small, high fiscal deficit. The deficits today have grown in many countries. Deficits have grown in many countries. Largely, as you have been observing, many factors have caused that, starting from the pandemic, going into the Ukraine war, the supply chain, all that comes in. And finally, China itself economy has slowed down. Compared to the United States, which is still keeping up its growth rate, not as much as required, but I think the strongest economic growth that has happened is in the United States today compared to all these countries. Japan is one country which has the highest debt compared to other countries. It is still not affected by high inflation, continues to have a low growth rate, continues to have a low interest rate in the market at this point in time. This is some of the non-traditional countries. I've taken Mexico, Canada, of course, China, South Korea, Eurozone, and Britain. These are some of the non-traditional, which means non-USD traditional countries compared to USD. Now, in all these, what you're seeing here, all these countries between 2021 to 2020, all these current countries and the currencies have declined vis-a-vis the dollar, which has become strong, Now I just brought in RMB, how this is yet not a comparable competitor to the USD. And that's what a lot of debates are going on. When will RMB take over or dethrone, the word they use, dethrone the USD? Currently fulfills only 5 criteria. Those criteria are the characteristics, only 5 criteria. Unit of account, exchange medium, store value, and economic size. These are the only characteristics. As a store of value, not yet. And the main reason is, of course, it's a controlled economy. And secondly, it's still not convertible on the capital account. It's only on the trade account. So there's no stability as far as the market is concerned, as far as the investor is concerned. It is not freely available or fully convertible. Underdeveloped financial market, not as strong, not as resilient as the US market or even I would put it the Western market, financial market in the Western world. Cross-border trade transactions and bilateral swap is on the rise. So in order to make up for its dominance in the international market, this country has gone for currency swap. I believe 35 central banks which China trades with countries have agreed on this currency swap to make it simpler and to avoid the route going to USD. So Hong Kong, London, Singapore, Taipei, all this also trading. Now, China trading its currency, one onshore, the other offshore. CNY, CNH, if you follow the Chinese market. They say CNY, which is RMB, inshore market, not really tradable in the financial market outside China. CNH is the currency RMB traded in Hong Kong. That's traded in the international markets. The one part of it not traded, the other part of it is traded. Currently, there has been some negative effect even on the Chinese CNH, which is controlled by the monetary authorities of Hong Kong, but of course directed by the People's Bank of China. So having these two currencies coming together in inshore or offshore, it is an indication there's no stability as far as or one unit currency of CNY, which can compete with the other international reserve currencies like the Western world and the United States, US dollar. Dollar plays a leading role in commodity pricing. That's a unit of accounting. Commodity pricing, global pricing, international commodity pricing are, as I said, 80% is in USD. The domestic challenge for China, that's for China. Social, could be social instability, not yet confirmed, but there is a group of political scientists and economists are also moving in the direction that with the president being confirmed for a third term, whether that will bring more stability or instability. The whole group of these political scientists feel it could become more instability, social instability in the country, in China. That's one. Political. There's also a group which says there could be political instability going forward after the third term that he is likely to get, or he will surely get it. Okay. So in the international markets, investors take into account a country's political stability or risk, social instability or risk of social instability. The markets don't move very readily into a country without assuring that they have that sort of backing in terms of political or social instability. That's the point I got there. Now, these are some concluding remarks. Let me just make one observation on political stability, which is probably what I think so, and from my point of view. Now, if any country is aiming to become a dominant country in terms of the financial world, or in terms of dominance in economic sense, my feeling is investors may not consider that country to be stable because a one-man rule definitely is questionable how long this could continue in a stable environment, right? No investor would want to put a money in a country which is not open to accounting, open to market flows, capital market flows from inside to outside. You still have capital controls. And so that's not really going to move unless and until there's a freedom given to the central bank, PBOC, People Banks of China, which is still state controlled. It's not an autonomous, not even a semi-autonomous institution, it's a state control. So that really won't drive any foreign investor to get into China and put their money or capital as they have done it, and they're doing it now, but not to an extent of what's expected, as if it becomes the dominant, replacing the US dollar as international reserve currency. That's my observation. What China is moving into maybe a competitive currency, which is the central bank digital currency. They are already on an experimental stage. They have tried it out in about 6 or 7 provinces in China using CBDC, and it's still on trial basis. So if this transformation happens, whenever it happens, if China then dominates in the digital world, maybe yes, they could have a better control in terms of the international markets or the international financial currencies. These are some of the key words, or I may call concepts, which need to be considered when we study this whole area of international reserve currency or a reserve currency in terms of even the money, the fiat money, or later in terms of digital money, which is coming up. So I will stop at this stage, but anything that you want to share, I'll be interested to know.
2 points. Number one, India expected to become the third largest economy by 2030. Not that. How do you see India rupee taking some space in international
Okay.
financial market?
From the, yeah, okay, that's good. Okay. So let me start with the characteristics. I think India still has not fully opened its capital markets, right? And Indian currency is still not convertible, fully convertible. Your measure, which I accept, is from the GDP measure, which is true, which is absolutely true. Now, there has been some controversy in GDP too. What do you want? Would you want to take the nominal measure, or do you want to take the real measure? Some economists feel, well, the real measure makes sense, but that really tells you what is the living standard of that country. Answering your question, it may dominate or it may grow up or go up in terms of the ranking, but right now I think is it fifth?
Fifth.
Yeah, that's right. Fifth, yes. On the basis of this, you have US, China, Japan, right? Germany, and then comes India, yes. So these are fundamental requirements which have been proved to be in directing international reserve currency or international currency. If India opens up, at least to begin with from the capital market, maybe that will be the first step. Definitely be the first step. I'm sure investors are willing to come into China, provided these controls are a little bit eased. And so I won't say it can never happen. It can happen going step by step. And this is the same condition which China is also facing. Well, China is in a better position in terms of its reserves. But India definitely can rise to the status, provided, of course, these things are complete. Right? That's my view.
But to the last point also you mentioned in the previous slide regarding digital currency.
Yeah, okay.
So
yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
So cryptocurrency and digital currency put together, how are they going to impact the scenario of the financial market?
Okay. As far as my understanding and reading, I don't think crypto is yet coming into this central banks, because that's more like a speculative, if you agree with this, it's more speculative to me, the crypto. But this is going to be backed by the central banks, the one we are talking about, CBDC. Yes, India, I have read about it. They're launching out, they've asked the RBI to start a pilot project on crypto. But the biggest requirement would be how you regulate this currency. The United States, that they're going backwards. They're talking about regulation first. How would you regulate? Like how you regulate the fiat money, how would you regulate the CBDC? So US took steps down to top, regulations, and then go up to the market. So one still doesn't have a regulation, crypto, of course, they say the markets, the capital markets or the currency markets can be regulated, but there's no fundamental rules for crypto. So I would treat it and more like an investment, speculative investment, rather than this. So that's that's going to be the next generation, which can, if that dominates or that gets high, the share between the CBDC and the this fiat money put together, possibly China might get a better positioning. I don't know how long it will take. They have already experimented for 1 year, I think, Chinese CBDC in 5 countries. So that's how it is going. The future is CBDC, central bank digital currency, and a combination maybe to begin with between CBDC versus, supplemented by fiat money, but both are regulated by the central bank. So that regulation is what brings trust to any currency, and I suppose that way should probably move in that direction.
Most of the major economies going for CBDC.
Yeah, but they're very cautious.
Dominance of dollar will definitely come down.
It should come down by easing all these restrictions, right? Of course, yen and all have no restrictions. They are convertible. They have no controls on capital movements. All that is there. But once invoicing comes in, now if you take Japan, that's my last reflection. It's been low for the last 10 years. Growth has been so. No investor wants to push your money in an economy which still talks about 1% or 1.5%. That's not going to be anything but negative. Yeah, negative. Negative with the inflation. That's right. So I don't foresee in my generation that CBDC is going to, but I'm foreseeing a combination of both regulated by one central bank without much, and of course cross-border SWIFT, the SWIFT messaging system that also has to come. Thank you. Yeah.
So recently, the government, RBI, major says that the Indian bond will be listed in global indices. This is going to boost some inflow of US dollar. China has done it some 5-6 years back. So how it is going to impact stability and value?
Okay. See, you're talking about the bond market, the bond markets. They're issuing in
Listing of bond in international exchange
in rupees.
in rupees.
Okay, that's okay. So I'm not a finance guy, but let me think it this way. Any listing in any currency obviously looks back to what is the stability or the condition of the economy, right? The backing of any bond, anything has to be stability of the economy. As long as stability is not there, I really don't think there will be many buyers on that, right? But as I mentioned, on a swap, currency swap, maybe Russia can say, okay, I'll buy your bond because you're accepting ruble. China, those kind of things can happen. I suppose that's the only way I can think of. But I can go back to economics, which says, well, you have to be politically stable, your market should be open, your market should be strong. Strong means liquidity, and all that comes in as far as my understanding.
And sir, based on current account deficit, as India's economy is showing.
Yeah, go ahead. I can
So Indian economy's data is showing. So I don't feel for next 8 years India is going, Indian rupee is going to become fully convertible. But the Chinese government has announced that very soon their currency may be fully convertible. So what do you see that it will be fully convertible?
They have been saying this for many years. We lived there for 10 years, they have been saying it. I go back to my premise. If it's a one-man show, you may do anything you want. I may be wrong, my thinking is how I think. You may do anything you want. The world market and the world investors say, can I trust the guy who's running the country? Right? You have this experience in Africa, you have in South America, right? So a trust in a country also comes in the political stability. Now you won't say that's going to be stable with one-man show, right? So in that way, I suppose India is better off. I think it's not a one-man show. Okay, it's still open to, but RBI is still probably still not autonomous. That can be an issue. Also, those big central banks in developed countries are at least partially autonomous. Be it the RBI, be it the England, the central bank of UK, all that is there, right? I'm not sure. Is RBI still made autonomous? Really?
Because a couple of times Shakti Kanu's went against Modi government and hiked the price.
Not rich.
At least, I mean, I haven't.
It has
But
autonomy.
free consequences also.
It has autonomy, but they need to work with the.
That's okay.
That's one, that's different. See, that way, in the US, they still have to go to the Congress and testify what's going on and why it's going on. But the Congress cannot tell the Federal Reserve Bank, they better lower the interest rate because Biden is going to the.
Same here.
Yeah, okay.
So it's
Well,
not a that's good.
That's what my feeling. You may,
It's not.
no.
Sovereign will.
Yeah,
Otherwise, demonetizations should not come with it.
Monetary policy is driven by RBI or government?
that we are. Of course, in based on the economic policy, based on the
Policy.
economic policy, I agree on that, yes. No. The government spells out the economic policy and the RBI follows up to fulfill the policy, that's true. But in the United States, yes, they do consider the policy, but if the policy is going to have a negative impact on the economy, they say no, we don't want to do that. As you see, even the last regime, when President Trump was that, he was trying to influence to Federal Reserve, please bring down the interest rates, right? But they refused to do it. So my knowledge, of course, is it's not autonomous, maybe semi-autonomous, which also I'm not very sure. Yes, sir.
So you've been in China for 10 years now.
Yes.
How much can we trust the data which is coming out of China? If they say something, the economy is doing like this, whatever information comes out of China, now because you've been there, how much can we really trust that information that comes in?
There's a lot of skepticism on what the data is. Number one, it's not transparent, definitely not transparent. But when you look at the government data, comparative with the IMF, OECD, you see there's a difference. Now, how do they get it? Well, they have their own researchers sending information. So when living in China, we are subject to media controls or information controls. But because we are teaching in China, we also compare it to the IMF or the OECD in other countries. There we find there's a lot of discrepancy. Whenever there's a discrepancy of 2%, 1%, we can accept it. If there's like 10, 15%, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. Okay. That's the biggest challenge in China. Data. I mean, the authentic data, let's put it that way. Thank you. Thank you.
Such a very hard topic, you made it so simple to understand for the people who are not from the finance background. So we have a number of faculties from the other areas, and even we could understand some.
Let me say, I am still learning. I don't understand the whole thing going on here. But that's how we in academics are. Never you can claim that I know everything. I don't know everything. But when you go analyze that, you get some idea of what could be and what I think. And that, anyway, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We remain connected.
Sure. I hope to continue. Thank you. Thanks for your patience and attending this. Thank you very much. Welcome. On the data, I want to ask you, just how is the something is CMA in the data that you get? All this kind of that it corroborates with the government. It's too large, but that's not what.
That's at least for listed company, you can't.
Government can't change it, but there is SOEs, state-owned enterprise, is large. Alibaba and all are really don't. You don't get the urgency, right?
So please come.
Come believe me.
Like,
All the faculty members who are here, they can join us for a group photo. Vishal, take a- Thanks everyone for joining.